Joining us live tonight with their reaction, Eric Duncan, Conservative MP for Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry, Pranay Anand, Executive Director of the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention, Toronto, and David Brennan, Professor of Social Work at University of Toronto. Eric, let's begin with you. You've been very open about your personal story, how it felt that first time you tried to give blood. Briefly walk us through how it made you feel then, and with that in mind, how important today is on a personal level.
So for myself, I've considered myself very fortunate in my coming out story and coming out as gay and living in a rural Eastern Ontario town. And one of the few times, thankfully, that I've felt stigma or discrimination or something uncomfortable was when at the age of 17, about 17 years ago, I tried to go in and donate blood for the first time, like my family had been doing for generations. And the emotions that day, realizing that I was not allowed, felt like there was something wrong with me. I wasn't out at the time, so I had to go through and pretend like I was donating blood, put a sticker to show that no, my donation wouldn't be accepted. I remember going back to my car that night and thinking, when that blood donation got to Canadian Blood Services, it was going in the dumpster simply for the reason I was gay. And so today, I think the word I would say is I feel relieved that there's actually a date to bring an end to this. It's taken a long time, frankly, too long to do, but we owe it to thousands of people that have shared their stories and experiences to finally get here.
Long time coming. Pranay, Canada introduced a lifetime ban for gay men 30 years ago in 1992. Take us back to why this was first introduced in the first place.
Well, it started with the stigma, not knowing enough about sexual orientation on gay men. It's got a lot to do with the scare around HIV. It's got to do a lot around not knowing, the fear of unknown, as I say, of what gay sex is and what people do and sexual behaviors and what does safety look like. So it's outright discriminatory. And it's been a long time coming, and it's been decades since we've been advocating for a policy that does not discriminate against gay people for donating blood simply because they're gay, simply because of their sexual orientation.
Yeah, you mentioned much more fear-based than scientific-based in science. So, David, if it was a simple fix, just changing the questionnaire, and the Prime Minister said it's been long discriminatory, as Pranay mentioned as well, why did it take so long?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think there's a lot of, as Pranay mentioned, there's been a lot of stigma associated with sex that happens between men, quite frankly. And because of that stigma, there's been a lot of desire to overprotect the blood supply. There was a reason to do it initially in terms of the fact that there were a few transmissions of HIV early on before we had testing. But once we've had good and solid testing, which, by the way, we've had for over 30 years, it wasn't a reason anymore to continue this ban. I think, or the deferral policy. I think part of the reason is the thought behind it is that if we can reduce the possibility of the number of people that would test positive and, as an agency, we'd have to manage or deal with that, then it might make sense to figure out another way to cut people out of the process by asking them about their sexual orientation. The problem is, it identifies a whole class of people. It wasn't really based on behavior. And quite frankly, it wasn't really based in science. Most gay men right now are very aware of HIV. They're probably, more aware than most other people, and are taking precautions between, condom usage or taking medication to treat their HIV or prevent HIV transmission. The actual risk of HIV transmission has been dropping dramatically for a long time. And as one of the scientists who put together a study to look at some of this data and this information, we very quickly learned, this was not a useful or relevant policy anymore. We needed to not make it about a group, but make it about behavior.
So, Eric, how impactful will it be to allow more men to donate blood, considering how badly blood is always needed?
Well, absolutely, to that point. There has been a desperate call, and particularly during COVID with shutdowns and not being able to use community centers for mobile clinics and so forth, there's been urgent appeals for it. So the fact now that the potential donor pool is open to thousands and thousands of men across the country now, coming in September. I'm a bit frustrated at the deadline of needing to take 5 months to actually implement this change. We've known about this change coming. But nevertheless, this is going to allow more men to safely donate blood and make a difference in this country. There's a need for it, and this could address part of it.
Of course, yeah. At least now there's a, it's not immediate, but at least now there's an end date. So Pranay, talk about the advocacy that's gotten us here to this point, and all the work that's gone into overturning this ban.
Well, people have shared their stories. Research has been done. We've been, for decades, we've been saying this is not okay. And this is not the only time gay men are saying a policy against us is not okay. It's discrimination. However, this is one clear example where mystery and lack of information and lack of where policy doesn't catch up with science, where education is not prioritized. As David said, gay men are very, very, very aware of sexual health and their and HIV prevention. So on the one hand, we're talking about PrEP, we're talking about U equals U, we're talking about HIV prevention. But on the other hand, policy is really not catching up with the science. And that's a huge problem. And people have shared their stories, as I said, and there's been tremendous amount of qualitative and quantitative research being done. People have talked about how they feel in instances where they're turned away by CBS and saying, we cannot take your blood, just simply because of who you are.
So David, let's talk about the stigma here. There talked about the idea or the possibility of being turned away just because of you're being a gay man. What does this mean for removing the stigma surrounding gay men and HIV? As all of you have mentioned, gay men might be some of the most educated on safe sex and HIV. So this really must go a long way to removing stigma around that.
Well, it's certainly, I would hope that it would create a much larger openness and awareness about how the stigmatizing of blood is highly problematic. I can guarantee you right now that my Twitter feed or any other kind of social media or comments and any articles about this story, there are going to be lots of very homophobic comments written about the change in this policy. There are still people who believe, I don't want the blood that comes from a gay man. I kid you not. I can guarantee you, if you want evidence, I'll show it to you tomorrow. It'll be there. This will help, though, because it kind of it takes out the idea that we're talking about a specific group of people. And instead, we're focusing on the kinds of behaviors or the number or new partners that people might be having that might be increasing risk, regardless of gender. And by the way, this actually also helps to address issues around whether trans people can donate blood as well, because they have to often answer a lot of very personal, invasive questions about their bodies. And at this point, it would be the same question that other people would be asked as well. So there's also an impact here, I think, for our trans community members as well.
All right, so of course a good step forward in removing the stigma, but no doubt still lots of work to do. Eric Duncan, Pranay Anand, and David Brennan, thanks so much for joining us on this big day tonight.
Thank you very much.